salvation, you always have to remember that people have different meanings behind the word saved. So when they ask a question like, how can somebody be saved at this point in Scripture, before that point, well, that's when you have to break it down and show that, we have been saved, we are being saved, and we will be saved. Now, I heard, right at the end of the segment, you said you wanted to share something else. You kind of left a cliffhanger.
Yeah, one of my friends sent me an email about something that Congressman Ted Lieu from California said, well, sort of didn't say, in the Capitol in Congress. And, basically it was, what did Jesus say about homosexuality?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In March of this year, the Washington Post published an article titled, GOP lawmakers push historic wave of bills targeting rights of LGBTQ teens, children, and their families. In April, Washington Post published another article titled, Some Republicans Fear Party Overreach on LGBT Measures. I just thought I would now recite for you what Jesus Christ said about homosexuality. I yield back.
However, Jesus and the apostles were Jews, and the first converts were Jews. So they already knew their Old Testament. And back in Leviticus, chapter 18, it says, do not have sexual relations with a man as one does with a woman, because that is detestable. And do not have sexual relations with an animal or defile yourself with it. A woman must not present herself to an animal to have sexual relations with it. That is a perversion. Do not defile yourselves in any of these ways, because this is how the nations that I am going to drive out before you became defiled. So these bad practices of homosexuality and bestiality were practiced by the pagan nations. And God makes it very clear to the Jews that this is not something you're supposed to do. And in Leviticus chapter 20, it says, if a man has sexual relations with a man as one does with a woman, both of them have done what is detestable. They are to be put to death. Their blood will be on their own heads. So God makes it pretty clear in the book of Leviticus that homosexual activity is wrong. And then in Romans chapter 1, Paul writes, so this tells us that the first Christians, the Christians also taught the same thing. In Romans chapter 1, starting around verse 26, Paul writes, God gave them over to shameful lusts. Even their women exchanged natural sexual relations with unnatural ones. In the same way, the men also abandoned their natural relations with women and were inflamed with lust for one another. Men committed shameful acts with other men and received in themselves the due penalty for this error. Furthermore, just as they did not think it worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God, so God gave them over to a depraved mind so that they do what they ought not be done. They have become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. And toward the end of chapter 1, Paul writes, although they know God's righteous decree that those who do such things deserve death, they not only continue to do these very things, but they also approve of others who practice them. So in the Catholic Church, we do not teach that, homosexuals need to be put to death. They die spiritually when they reject God's plan for sex. And if a person has same-sex attraction, we don't ask them to deny their feelings, but we do require them to not act on their feelings. Just like an alcoholic might have a desire to drink alcohol excessively, we expect them to not drink alcohol excessively and become drunk. Or if you have a desire to rob a bank, you don't go out and rob the bank. So just because you have a feeling towards something doesn't mean you have to act on that feeling. We're supposed to do what we're supposed to live as Jesus calls us to live, not follow our every passion for whatever we want to do.
Yeah, Ken, I mean, I think that probably deserves an email to the congressman that give him the news that the Jews followed the Old Testament. That's probably something he never thought about before.
Right.
That Jesus followed the law, yeah.
Technically, he's right that Jesus didn't specifically, preach against homosexual activity, at least not recorded in the Bible. And of course, the Bible tells us that Jesus taught many other things that are not recorded here. So, maybe right. Jesus did talk about it, and we just don't have it written down.
That's true. Yeah, that's a great point, especially when you have Paul, who does touch on the subject. So, where did he get this idea that Christianity has adopted that moral norm? And he must have got it from the apostles that he conferred with.